Or
Yeah.
someone answer. Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. Okay. So to get started, this project, the greenhouse gas emissions modeling of the Santa Ana watershed, started about 2 years ago. And it has evolved a lot since its inception. So first off, it was originally just going to be an inventory and a database, and then it turned into developing a tool that can be used not only now but also down the road to evaluate greenhouse gas emissions from a variety of sizes of sites. So you could use this greenhouse gas emissions calculator that I'm going to show you and demonstrate today to evaluate a city block, to evaluate a sub-watershed, or to evaluate an entire watershed. Whatever, you can really tailor it to fit whatever your need is. So what I'm going to talk about today, and I have scheduled 2 hours for this. I was thinking it was only going to take an hour, and I have the room for an hour and a half. So we'll just take as many questions at the end as we can and as we have time for. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about Assembly Bill 32 and the water sector's involvement in that. Talk about the research goals for this project. Then I'm going to kind of start switching between the PowerPoint and actually going in and using the calculator to demonstrate how to develop a baseline for your study area, then how to develop different scenarios and compare them for the same study area. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you 3 different projects that are proposed water projects that will, and I'll show you how you can put in a baseline for those water projects and then evaluate what the greenhouse gas emissions reduction is going to be in the long term for those projects. So I'll get started. You probably have seen a little bit about the background of this project, but I'm going to go ahead and review it again just in case some of you don't know. But Assembly Bill 32 was passed in 2006, and it was the first time in any legislation that anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions and climate change were linked directly. So it was a really big step, and it also provided a timeline for statewide greenhouse gas emission reduction. It required quantitative accounting of greenhouse gas emissions reduction.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, is someone trying to ask a question? No? Okay. Yeah, if you guys could just keep your phones on mute unless you have a question, that'd be great. Anyway, sorry, back to the presentation.
We do have a question for you. I apologize.
Oh, please go ahead.
We're trying to log in, and it's telling us that the session is full and that we're supposed to contact our administrator. What does that mean?
Okay, that's a problem. I checked with GoToMeeting yesterday, and they said that we had a limit of 200 people, and I don't think we've met that.
No,
so,
the last time when we signed in, it was about 19.
Okay.
I mean, we can always listen to the audio, but we don't have a visual on this, and I'm not sure if anybody else has that problem.
It's showing a maximum of 26 on the attendee list.
I see that on the GoToMeeting session. You know, I apologize for that, and like I said, it was supposed to be a max of 100. What I can recommend is if you want to listen to the audio, you're more than welcome, but also this session is being recorded and will be posted on SAPA's website afterwards, so you can actually access the session later if that's an okay option for you. And once again, I profusely apologize for that. It's supposed to be capped at 200, and obviously that is not the case.
Okay, we will go ahead and listen to the audio, and then if we can somehow get the PowerPoint presentation, that would be fantastic.
You can get the PowerPoint presentation, but also the audio and everything I do on my computer will be posted as a recording.
Okay.
So it's not just the PowerPoint. You'll get to see the whole presentation.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and once again, I'm sorry. Okay, so moving forward. Sorry, getting back to where we were at. So AB 32 has 1990, has a 2020 emissions target right here. to get us back to our 1990 levels for the entire state. And this is across the board for every sector. And I'll talk more in a minute about what that actually means for the water sector. Now, by 2050, the goal is to be all the way down here to 80% below the 1990 levels. Now, especially for the water sector, that's a really, really lofty goal. And so it may seem daunting and that we could never reach it, but I'm going to show you a little bit later using the calculator that it actually is achievable. And so pursuant to AB 32 was the scoping plan. And the scoping plan focused on each of the sectors independently. And for the water sector, it talked a lot about the fact that there's going to be a lot of double accounting for the water sector because the #1 greenhouse gas emission source for us is our energy use. So that energy use is already being, or energy production is already being accounted for in the electricity sector. So what the scoping plan recommended is to focus on 6 ways to possibly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And those are listed here: water use efficiency, water recycling, water system energy efficiency, reuse of urban runoff, increased renewable energy production, and a public water. Now, the scoping plan did say that the water sector should make their strongest effort and show that they made a good faith effort to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and to actually show what it would take to reduce them to the AB 32 targets. However, they're not going to be held to that standard as opposed to the energy sector, which is going to be held to that standard. So for us, it's showing, okay, we have evaluated every project that comes through the planning department and said, you know, this will affect our greenhouse gas emissions in this manner. We rated our projects according to greenhouse gas emissions, among other factors, and we tried to increase or work on these 6 points shown here. So that was what was requested of us from the scoping plan. So for this study specifically, which, you know, when we first started this study, like I said, it's really evolved, but the initial goals, and we've stuck to them fairly well, are to explore the links between water resources, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions, to develop a decision-making tool, which is the tool I'm going to demonstrate in just a moment, the greenhouse gas emissions tool, that will allow the water sector to comply to AB 32 and show reporting criteria for AB 32. So to show, well, see, we've done this for our projects to evaluate their greenhouse gas emission reduction potential. This study considers both supply and demand options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provides recommendations to meet greenhouse gas emissions targets. So I guess I should back up a little bit and tell you guys, this tool is going to be available on the SAPA website very shortly, along with a user's manual and the results of how the tool was used in the SAPA watershed as a whole. So all of those things, and along with this presentation, will be available to you, and Jack is going to provide that link as soon as it is up and running on the. Which, Jack, do you know about what the timing is for that? No? No say?
Yes, Kristine. It's going to be within about 2 weeks.
Perfect. So all of these resources are going to. Okay. So the project was done in 3 phases. Phase 1 of the project was research and data collection. Did a large, only literature review, but a review of the reporting requirements in the scoping plan. Defined categories for the water sector and inventoried gas emissions from the Santa Ana watershed. Now during this phase, I realized that it is very, very challenging to collect detailed data on flow through all of the different water sector. So it made me realize that I needed to develop a tool to be used if you had a very, very data, or if you had extremely detailed monthly data for all of your facilities. So the tool can be used for both of those broad spectrum, and you can use it with only population data if that's all you have, or you can use it with the detailed data, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So phase 2 was the data evaluation. So all the data I collected, I did use it to evaluate emissions from sources and to develop the greenhouse gas emissions calculator. And then in phase 3, I used the calculator to develop scenarios for the Santa Ana watershed and show how the watershed could meet AB 32 and what they would have to do to meet the 2020 target and the 2050 target. Now, I showed what they would have to do. However, I realized some of those reductions may not be feasible. Some of the changes may not be feasible. I just gave them one scenario of how it could be met, and I'm going to show you guys how to make a scenario for your area of how it could be met. And then the deliverables, I described all of those to you, which are all going to be available on SAPA's website. So the baseline, I'm going to switch over to calculator now and show you guys how to develop a baseline, the data that is required for the baseline, and how to interpret your results and analyze your results. And this little graph right here is just a screenshot of what a scenario comparison looks like. And then I'm also going to show you how to develop your own scenarios and evaluate those. So let me just pull up the tool. You'll download a folder from the website, and it'll have two different, well, actually, there's going to be two folders available. The first folder you're going to download is going to include 2 Excel workbooks. Now, the first one is going to have, it's going to look just like this, and it's going to be the greenhouse gas emissions calculator. You're going to open it up, and this is going to be the first screen you see. It's a little bit of an introduction to the tool, the data that is required, and this is what I was talking to you guys about earlier. So there's 3 levels of data that can be used to run the greenhouse gas emissions calculator. There's the, which is population for 1990, 2000, and present. Whatever your study requires. So if the last data that's site-specific for you guys that you have available to you is 2012, that can be your present. If you have 2013, that can be your present. So it doesn't matter what date specifically you use as long as you're consistent throughout the calculator. The suggested data, however, so that will give you an answer, and all of the data that you don't put in will be, Southern California default data will be inserted, and I'll show you how that will work in just a minute. So you'll still get a very close estimate to what your greenhouse gas emissions would be, but it's not nearly as good as site-specific data. So suggested data to develop it would be projected population data for your project area out to 2050, water use per capita from 1990 to 2050, and percentage each of groundwater, state water project, Colorado River water, and self-supplied water. Now, if you have all of those site-specific, the only default data you're using is energy intensities. So you're going to get an extremely accurate representative of what your greenhouse gas emissions has been since 1990 and where it's likely to go out to 2050. Now, if you are lucky enough to have detailed data, which is right over here in this box, it's explained, detailed data is imported data in acre feet. You can either have monthly or annual from 1990 to present, and also same data for groundwater, then all of your pump data, so flows for your pumps and energy, so you can create your own energy intensity. So not only is your suggested data site-specific, but your detailed data, if you have that site-specific, then it really is an accurate statement of what your greenhouse gas emissions has been, and it's a fairly accurate projection of what it's likely to be in this scenario. If you have this data available to you, please use it. However, if you don't, because I realize it's hard to come by, then just go ahead and use the data. So when you first open this, one thing a lot of you are going to need to do is come over here to File in your Excel, go to Options, then you're going to need to go to Trust Center, Settings, and then go to macro settings. And you're going to need to enable your macros right here. See, mine's already enabled. But that's going to allow the macros to run on the tool so that you won't run into any errors. And then once you do that, you should be good to go. So I'm just going to jump right into developing a baseline example. Unless anyone has any questions, of course. No? Okay, good. So I have started out with some base population data. Now this set of data right here, population for 1990 to the current population, is the only data that is absolutely required in order to run the model. So this is a set of data that's for Orange County. I just picked them because I have their population data. And so, well, I guess I should explain a little bit more about the tool. So when you go to each of these tabs down here at the bottom, you'll see, for example, with population, it gives you step-by-step instructions on exactly what you need to insert, exactly how to use all of these boxes. So if you get confused, you can't remember what I said, just come right over here and look at this, and it'll guide you through it very, very easily. So first off, if you didn't have this population data, you could go to this website right here, the census website, and figure out the population data for your study area. And you can put that in for these 4 numbers. So with just those numbers, I can go to my results tab, which is the only one over here that isn't colored. And I actually have a baseline. So this is using all Southern California default data with just the very minimum population data required to run the model. So if you're interested, you could say, well, if I were to use all of the default data, what would happen? So I'm going to name this scenario default because it's mostly default data. And then once you name your scenario on your results tab, you can come up and export your results to what is called the scenario manager, which is the other file which you'll download. You need to have them both open in order to do this, but once the files are open, you can export it, and you see that scenario came over to this other file. And for now, that's all you need to do for that. You can go in and continue on with creating additional scenarios, or for us, baseline. So, and explanation on the colors of the tabs down here. So the non-color tabs are the instructions and the results. The yellow tabs are the suggested data. So this, basically, if you want to really use this tool to the best of its ability, you need to go through each of these yellow tabs and insert your data. Now the blue data over here is all detailed data. So I'll finish going through this and then I'll talk to you a little bit more about detailed data. So I also know, because I looked it up on the Department of Transportation website, they have a really good population projection for Orange County. So I know that their 2020 population is likely to be 3,324,011. Okay. And I'm just going to name then. Oh, and well, let me tell you guys this. So if you know your projected population data, say only out to 2030, which I know a lot of the Santa Ana Watershed population projections only go out to 2030 because that was a really big benchmarker in your OWOW plan. So if you only know it out to 2030, put it in to there. So that's the next one is 3,183,770. So put that in, and then, okay, say you don't know these last 2 years. What the tool does is it says, okay, so the average projected population growth from 2010 to 2050 for Southern California, so this is Southern California specific, is 61%. So what it does is it takes the growth that you put into 2030, it gets rid of that, and then linearly interpolates the other 2 years and puts those in. So that is the average Southern California population growth data. So you can project all the way up to 2050, even if your population projections only go to 2030. So that's kind of a great feature. And also, if you don't know your population projections, then it will just project them all the way across the board for the 4 future scenarios, or excuse me, the 4 future decades. So I'm just going to finish putting this in really quick. Oh, hold on. So that's all the projected population data that's in. So if I was doing this for the first time, I would say, wow, well, what did that do to my results? It changed them a little bit because it's more site-specific. It's going to be more accurate. So if we want to see exactly how much it changed it compared to, our default population data, we can do another export of results and just name this one population. And go ahead and export that. And keep entering your data. So then you go to water use per capita. So before, for my results, I didn't put in any water use per capita data. So the Southern California default is 209 gallons per capita per day, per person. So that's a pretty good estimate because it's site-specific to Southern California. Now, if you come down to little sub-areas of Southern California, you're going to get a variety of different gallons per capita per day. So if you want to know exactly what's going on for your study area, you need to put it in. So I know that for Orange County back in 1990, it was 240. Back in 2000, it was 221. And in 2010, it was 175. And the present is 175. So if you think, okay, well, that's all I know. I don't know about the projected per capita water use. So you'd think, well, it's probably just going to go back to the default. But that's not the case because your site-specific data says that currently your per capita water use is 175. So that's a better estimate of what's going to happen into the future. It's likely going to go down. It's not likely going to go up. And worst case scenario, it stays the same for gallons per capita. So what the tool does is instead of taking this default data, it takes the most recent data that you put in for site-specific data, and it perpetuates that through the out to 2050. So, and on any of these tabs, if you're confused about what's going to be carried forward, because like you'll see default data, you'll see site-specific data, you can come down and it tells you what's actually being put into the equation. So check your data and say, oh, yep, that's what I wanted. That looks good, and I'm going to keep it at 175. Who knows what's going to happen with conservation? And this is our baseline, so this is kind of the no action scenario. We're ready to go to water supply. Now, this is where Orange County really, really differs from the baseline. So baseline or default data for Southern California is down here, and it's 17% groundwater, 76% imported water, and 7% self-supplied water. Now, Orange County has a predominance of groundwater. So they're at 75% up here. Their state water project is 6%. Their Colorado River Aqueduct water is 12%. And so as you put these in, this is your present-day best estimates of what your water supply portfolio looks like. So you put in the first three, and then the remainder will be self-supplied water. And you don't need to put that in because that's calculated once you put in the other 3 percentages. So you can see here for groundwater, you can actually put in the volumes of groundwater that you have imported for each of these decades. Now, you don't do the decade as a whole. You can either do an average for the 10 years, or you can do just 1990, just 2000, or just 2010. Whatever you prefer, whatever you think is more representative for your site. And you can put those in if you know them, but if you don't know them, what the tool does is it takes what you put in for current, and it says, well, it's very likely that that's what's happened in the past. It also likely of what's going to happen in the future. So that's perpetuated, you'll see historically, also into the future 75% for groundwater. Same for surface water and self-supplied water. So, but if you have the volumes, go ahead and put it in your volumes, and then I'll show you how to experiments with different scenarios using the projected water supplies in just a second. So we'll just finish this up real quick. So let's go back to our results and see, wow, that changed it drastically. And it wouldn't if Orange County was more of the Southern California standard. But like I said, they have a very, very large portion of their water supply portfolio comes from groundwater. So I'm going to name this little adjustment water supply. And we're just going to, this is just so that we can compare what the different levels of data have done. And I'm going to go ahead and export those results. And I'm just going to remind you guys again, if you forget what you're doing in any of these tabs, please go to the instructions and it'll remind you what you need to do. So then you go to the potable water and you put in the treatment flow through your treatment plants in million gallons per day. And you can put in historic, present, and then over here you can put in projected if you have that. So Southern California default for most plants is 20 million gallons per day. So that will be inserted if nothing else is used. And let's go to our scenario manager over here. And so we've created 3 different scenarios, right? And that's going to compare our different levels of data. So now let's go back and stay with this medium level of data without using detailed data and see how we can change different scenarios and how they're projected into the future. So specifically, you guys all know the 20 by 2020 reduction goal. So all of California has a goal to reduce water consumption by 20% by the year 2020. So how you can do that is you can, well, hold on, let me explain a little bit here. So in projected per capita water use right here, you can actually say if I want to get down to a certain level, like say my goal in 2020 is to be at 160, you can put that in here. And you can continue over and go, okay, now I want to be to 145. And you can use it that way. But most people don't know their exact numbers they want to get to. They know their percentages. So by 2020, we want to have a reduction. So reduce it by 20%. And that will show you, oh, well, that's all the way down to 140. That's a pretty drastic move, right? So let's see what that does to our results. You can see it did change them quite a bit. So I'm going to name that scenario 20 by 2020. And I'm going to go ahead and export that. And then say, okay, we need a further reduction by 2020 because we're not getting, we're not reducing our greenhouse gas emissions as low as we really would like to. So one way to do that is say, okay, we want to reduce our state water project to 2% of our total water. So 2% of total water. Let's say we'll keep our groundwater at 75%, but we're going to have more self-supplied water because we're going to use some rainwater harvesting or some water reuse, some new development that you are going to reduce your imported water and increase your self-supplied water. So you come down here and you see, wow, that made a big difference. So let's see what it did to the results. Whoa, that made a huge difference. So you can see self-supplied water really, really makes a difference because when you go over here, this graph shows you where each of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from, so what portion of the water sector. So if you're looking here, these are your conveyance emissions. And so since you just reduced your imported water supply by 75%, it just, bam, that's almost non-existent now. And it didn't affect your other, well, it did affect your distribution emissions slightly, but it didn't affect your other, your potable water or your groundwater. So it really made a large effect. So let's say this is 20 by 20 plus 10% or 2% imported water. And let's export that. Okay, now these scenarios that I came up with, I literally just pulled them off the top of my head, so they may not make sense for this area. They may not be what this area would be looking at, but it's just an example of how you can create scenarios. So then you come over here to the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Scenario Manager. You click on the Comparison tab, and you hit Compare. And what it's done is it's graphed out all of our scenarios that we sent. Now I'm going to explain how to interpret each of these. So the default, if you'll remember, that was using just population data, and all the rest of it was Southern California default data. So for most areas, that would be pretty good. But like I said, for Orange County, it's not very good because they have such a high portion of groundwater. So that's the big jump between this set and this set. So here, the default data is just kind of plugging along. Oh, excuse me, up here. The default data is just kind of plugging along, and it's the highest one because imported water is much more energy intensive than groundwater. So then we changed the population projection, if you guys remember. And instead of using the Southern California default, which is expected to grow between 2010 and 2050 by 60%, we used Orange County's projected data. And apparently they're not going to grow as fast. I don't know if they're closer to build out or if just because of expense people aren't moving there as quickly, but it does change things. So like I said, the projected population is going to be representative for most of Southern California, but it's not exactly perfect for Orange County. So that's the difference there. Then we changed the water supply portfolio, which jumped us down to these scenarios down here. So just changing the water supply portfolio gave us this result. And like I said, I mean, that's the huge difference is groundwater versus imported water. So you can see it really, really does matter. And then if you can reduce 20% per capita by 2020, that brings you all the way down to here. And then the last scenario, which was the 20% by 2020, and then in addition, dropping the imported water from the State Water Project to 2%, and you're clear down here. So you can see, you know, small changes really do have large effects when it comes to energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. And another thing I want to point out regarding that, as I've gone through and done this, the results tab back in the greenhouse gas emission calculator has a ton of information for you. So it has your total groundwater in gallons per day for the population, both historically, present, and projected into the future, surface water, and it has your energy intensities. Now, so far, we've just been using default energy intensities, which are located at the back of the spreadsheet in this default energy data tab. And what they are is their average energy intensities for each of these processes for Southern California. And it's also a breakdown, and this came from eGrid, of each of the greenhouse gas emissions for each year for the average in California. So this is the default data. Now, if you were to go in and use site-specific data for your energy intensities, so an example of that would be going to your water treatment data and putting in actual flow data for each of your plants here, and putting in actual energy data on the next tab over for each, it would create an energy intensity value in kilowatt hours per million gallons of water produced. So that would be even more site-specific. And then you can do a reality check to yourself by going to the results tab and saying, okay, my energy intensities, which are located here for my groundwater, once you put in your site-specific data, these will change. Now, the reason they're steady is because I'm using the default data. But once you put in site-specific data, these will change, and you can see, oh, I must have, you know, if one of them's drastically out of range of the others, you either have a typo or you have an error in your data or something going on. So it's kind of a good reality check. So you have your energy intensities through here. Then starting here, you have your greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the reason these don't stay the same, even though we're using the default energy intensities, is because the greenhouse gas emissions factors for historical data I actually have for California. So like I said, that's in the last tab. So each of the greenhouse gas emissions each of the different greenhouse gases are converted over to CO2 equivalents, and that's how that number is developed. So that's why they're not constant throughout. And then you have your total annual emissions numbers here. And then, like I said, each of these are graphed up, and you have your total graph here that's also separated out. So that is creating a baseline and developing different scenarios. Another interesting thing that you might want to do is say, okay, I know we got down to 20% less water use by 2020, but we want to go even further. And we want to do 10% each decade because, you know, of these amazing new technologies that are coming out that are, you know, great at conserving water, or, you know, we're not having any outdoor water use, whatever your goals are. You can do those, you can do that, you can analyze that here. So by 2030, you want to be down another 10%. And then you set a different goal where you want to look at annual, you know, and what would an annual reduction of this much do? You can insert that down here. But I'm just going to continue on with decadal. So you did 10% each decade reduction. And then you think about it logically, and you say, well, you know, that takes me all the way down to 102 gallons per capita per day. You know, is that feasible for my area? And then you can start developing different methods of how you might actually be able to meet that conservation goal. So, I mean, it's a pretty cool tool to say, you know, if we were going to get down to this number, how would we do it? And this is the number we need to be at. So that's a great use of this tool. So I think that kind of explains the baseline and how to develop different scenarios. And obviously, you can be creative and work on, you know, what's going to work for you. So if you're concerned that you might have a population reduction for some reason, and say, I'm scared that my population is going to drop by 5% that year, and another 2% by this decade, but then it's going to have a huge bump for some reason, and it's going to increase by 10%. You can put these different scenarios in here for population growth, and the same thing for, obviously, per capita water use, which I already showed you, and then water supply. So I can go through for each of these decades and say, well, our ultimate goal by 2050 is to have 0 State Water Project data and 0 Colorado River Aqueduct data. So if we reduce it, so you're at 6% for State Water Project right now, you go down to 5% this year, 3% this year, and 2% this year to 2040. Then you can see, all right, we can gradually get there by increasing our self-supplied water, however you feel that your area can do that, but then you can evaluate what that's going to do to your greenhouse gas emissions. So does anybody have any questions so far just on this portion? Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and move on, get back to the PowerPoint to show you guys how each of these projects. So that was more of, that can be used on the watershed or a sub-watershed, or if you wanted to evaluate your block or whatever smaller group you wanted to evaluate, or larger for that matter. But if you wanted to use the tool to evaluate how a project is going to affect greenhouse gas emissions in the long term, I'm going to now show you how to do that. So the Vulcan, I randomly picked, well, back up a little bit. SAPA gave me their 20 finalist projects for funding, and they said, we want these to all be analyzed for their greenhouse gas emissions benefit. So I went through each of the projects and did that for those that could be analyzed using the calculator. Now, obviously, a water quality project is not going to be able to be analyzed because it doesn't alter your water supply portfolio, your treatment data, or your distribution data. So it's not going to show a greenhouse gas emissions benefit. But most of these projects could be evaluated using it. So I just randomly chose 3 different projects to show how to do that. So the Vulcan Pit Flood Control and Aquifer Recharge Project. It is an abandoned mine pit. It's a 58-acre site, but only 48 of those acres were going to be used for flood control and aquifer recharge. And it's estimated, and I was given this number by SAPA, that the acre-foot storage volume is 2,000. And that is interpreted as being an additional 2,000 acre-feet per year that will not have to be imported because it's being captured and recharged and can be used rather than importing that water. So how that data was input, well, first off, I collected data on the site. And I'm going to actually thank Rick from SAPA. He collected data for me on the site. And so this is the site data that I was provided. The gallons per capita per day use for Fontana City, which is the population area that's going to be affected by the project. The population of the area, the water supply portfolio, which you can see here. And you can see some of this data is a little bit spotty, like you don't have all of the information. And I'm going to show you how the tool deals with that, with data gaps. And even if you have data gaps, it's still important to use what site-specific data you do have, because the tool will interpolate, extrapolate, and fill in using the most accurate site-specific data that you're able to provide. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the tool. I'm going to open a fresh one. So that's just what it's going to look like right when you download it. You'll just have these 2 files. It'll be really easy to open and get rolling. Okay. So you open up this brand new sheet, and it shows you here your instructions, and you start cranking forward. So my population data that I have is, I'm just going to hurry and enter it, 114,176. 67, excuse me. I'm just going to enter these really quick. Okay, so that is the required data for the results in order to get to use. So after I've entered my required data, I can go and see, oh, look, I have an analysis of what the greenhouse gas emissions are for baseline for that area. Of course, as you know, their site-specific data is not provided, but I do have a little bit more site-specific data. I have 2020 and 2030 data for this area. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. So once you enter that data, I don't have population data for the last 2 years, but the tool goes ahead and extrapolates saying, okay, well, if the Southern California default is met, it will be a 60% growth between 2010 and 2050. So I can fill in this data, or the tool can fill in this data by just using that Southern California default. So that's what is done for the 2 years you don't know. Then the water use per capita data, I have pretty good data for that. I have data for 1990. And I have data for 2010. So you can just use that data, or you can say, well, and what the tool will do is it'll use this 281 and just fill in this gap. Now, to me, that doesn't make sense since I know these 2 data points and I know these 2 years. I can use linear interpolation and figure out this data point. So that's what I would do. So 249 would be just the linear interpolation between the 2. So, you know, in a lot of ways, sometimes you can estimate your own data like that better rather than allowing the tool to say, oh, well, they didn't put anything for 2000, so I'm going to go ahead and use the last year, which would be 281, which is, you know, that's a big jump from 281 to 216. So, you know, even though the tool will do it for you, you know, use common sense and for stuff like that, you know, figure out your own values. So then I have the present, which is 178, and then I have 2 projected values of 175 for the next 2 years, which you can put in or you don't have to, because if you put it in for 1 year, it'll perpetuate it out to 2050. And then you can go look at what's really happening, what's going into the equations. It shows you right down here, so that you aren't confused about what data is actually being, what data is not. My per capita water use data is in. Now for the water supply data for this area, I have water at 41%. I have state water project at, oh, excuse me. I'm going to go over here. There we go. For 2010 is what I'm looking at. 41%. And I have state water projects. Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. I am going to go up here. Okay. So 40% state water project at 5%, and Colorado River Aqueduct at 4%, and then self-supplied water. Now, this area has quite a large amount of self-supplied water, so they're going to have a lower greenhouse gas emission per person. So they're already a leg up because they have so much self-supplied water. But now, if this project were to come online in 2020, and it's going to reduce imported water by 2,000 acre-feet per year, what you can do is, on this tab, your total water use is calculated down here. So in 2020, their total water use is going to be 41,679. And the amount reduction is 2,000 acre-feet per year. So you can calculate out, you know, what's the percentage for that, and it looks like that's about a 5% reduction. So that 5% reduction is going to come straight out of imported water. So basically their imported water is going to drop to 0. And their groundwater, because what they're doing is they're recharging their groundwater, so in order to use that water, it's going to have to be pumped. So it's going to increase their groundwater by 5%. So you can go across and increase your groundwater by 5%. And it's going to be a slightly different percentage for each year, and you can, you know, be more exact. I'm just doing kind of a rough estimate so you guys can see how to use the tool. So that changes things, right? So you can come over here, And you can see, wow, look at that, how it just drops. I mean, your conveyance is such a high greenhouse gas emission because it has to come over such large distances and over extreme elevation changes. So it just has a lot of greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. So it really does make a difference when you can change your water supply portfolio. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that this is the action scenario. And I'm going to export that. And then I'm going to say, and I was slacking and I didn't export my initial scenario, so I'm going to go ahead and just change that back really quick. And go back to my results tab, and I'm going to call this no action. And I'm going to export results. So then you come over to your scenario manager, and you go to your comparison tab and hit compare. And it compares what this project is going to do for greenhouse gas emissions compared to the baseline. So this is the no action scenario. This is the action scenario. Now, I've also added, this is for my benefit, and if you guys find it useful, I can add it to the tool as a whole, but the percent difference between the two. And like I said, I didn't do a detailed analysis here. I just did some rough estimates, so that's why the percent difference doesn't change, just because I just put it in across the board. But if you did each decade, the detailed analysis of what that volume of water means as far as percentages, these would vary. So it tells you very, very quickly what the difference is. Now, there's one thing you might struggle with is, okay, well, that's the percent change for just this area. Now, what if I was looking at each of these projects compared to the watershed as a whole? Well, what you could do then is you, instead of using the data for the site-specific data, you could use the population data for the entire watershed if that's what you want to analyze it compared to. You could use the per capita water data for the entire watershed and the water supply portfolio for the entire watershed. Then you have to evaluate what your reduction is going to be for that percentage and then do a weighted reduction for the population compared to the site-specific area. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it's totally doable, and then you put in the reductions the same way in the water supply portfolio, and then you'll see a much, much smaller percentage reduction in your scenario comparison. So here you'll see a much smaller reduction, like your line will be, you know, just barely below this line. But that way it's a truer comparison because you can compare project to project, because each project is actually being applied to a different size population with different water supply portfolio, with different per capita water use. Hey, oh, am I comparing apples to apples? Am I, you know, comparing how much this is going to be a reduction as a whole, or am I just looking at percent? Because if you're looking at reduction as a whole, you're comparing apples to apples. But if you're looking at percent reduction, it makes sense because you're looking at different populations. So there's two different ways you can analyze projects. Like I said, this way I'm just comparing it percent reduction to the no action scenario for the site-specific data. Kind of a mouthful, sorry. And then I'm going to do, I'm just going to clear this out real quick so I can do a different project. I'll just close this. So that reminds me of another thing. So if you go through and you create a bunch of scenarios and you want to save it, what I recommend you do is you go over to File and you Save As, and you save your scenario analysis under a different name. You can keep a blank file called Greenhouse Gas Scenario Manager so that the next time you use the tool and export things, it doesn't break the macro. It'll continue to export to the proper file, and the analysis will work properly. So say this was your conservation scenario. You know, you just name it conservation or whatever you want to name it and save it that way. And then that always leaves a fresh one to open in your file that you downloaded. So let's look at a different type of project and see how you can enter that into the calculator. So this project is a customer handbook to use water efficiency in landscape. Now, you might think this is like obviously the best kind of project because it's probably the least expensive. It doesn't take any infrastructure. It's basically about education and promoting this tool, you know. So you create, you develop, and you promote the handbook. The handbook that this specific project is proposing is going to be specific to the Santa Ana River Watershed. It's going to be about 50 pages long, and it will be available for everyone. However, even though it's available for the whole watershed, the project is proposed for a specific area. So I'll show you that when I put it in the calculator. And here is, it's proposed for Riverside, so this is the data that I have on Riverside. And I'm going to hurry and put that into the calculator, and then I'll show you. So since the project is proposed for the Riverside, the city of Riverside, it doesn't mean that it won't affect other parts of the watershed because they can go to SAPA's website and download and use it. So you can play a little bit with, okay, well, if it affects this many people as opposed to this many people, what is the difference going to be in our greenhouse gas emission reduction? So that's another cool aspect, and I'm going to show you that right now. So remember, you open it up, and it just comes to this, and these would all be blank. We just filled them in last time, so that's why they're here. So I'm going to go ahead and just enter the population data for this project really quickly. Okay, so that is the population data that is required to run the tool. I also have 2020 and 2030 projections, so I'm going to put that in for the area. Because remember, as much site-specific data as you have, you should use it because every little bit will help it be a more accurate solution. Okay, but I don't have it for the last 2 decades, so the tool is going to go ahead and fill that in for me and look at it. You know, it looks pretty reasonable. It's not any crazy jumps. So then go to water use per capita, and I have most of that data. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And some of this data, I don't really understand why, but they said that for some reason in 2010 they're at 206 gallons per capita per day, and then they estimate it's going to go up in the future, and I don't know why. Maybe they have a reason for that, but this is just the data I was provided, so I'm using it, assuming that they have a reason for that. And I don't know. I can't think of any why they would go up, but they might. So this is the data I was provided, so this is what I used. So then the water supply portfolio, if you look at that and you put it in, it is 45 for groundwater, 3%, 6% for State Water Project, and 0 for Colorado River. And so they have a fairly large portion that is self-supplied water, as you can see here. So that's all the data that we need for this project, and it gives us this baseline no action scenario. And I'm going to go ahead and export that into the scenario analysis tool. And then I'm going to go back and I'm just going to adjust. So it's a pretty big difference. What they're saying here is that just the population of Riverside is going to, using this tool, is going to have a reduction of 7,240 acre-feet per year. So if you go down and you look at, okay, and if it's to go online in 2020, total water use, which I've highlighted down there, is 68,732. And if it's expected to have a reduction of 7,240, that's a 10% reduction. So, I mean, that's pretty huge. But, you know, I have faith that their high expectations of this project may come through. So we'll change the water supply portfolio and say, okay, that means this is going to go to 0 because they're not going to have any more imported water. This is going to reduce by 4%, so they're going to go to 41%. and that makes their self-supplied water go up, as you see here, by 10%. So looking at your results, wow, you know, like I keep reminding you guys, imported water just has such a huge greenhouse gas emissions footprint. So, you know, it just drops to 0, and that really, really changes things. Action scenario, and I'm going to just export it to the scenario manager, and then I'm going to go into my scenario manager, and I'm going to go to the comparison tab and hit compare, and you'll see a drastic difference. But the reason you don't see higher percentages over here is because this project area has such a higher population than the previous project area we analyzed. So that's why the difference of comparing baseline for the project area to an action scenario for the project area is different than comparing baseline for the watershed and then action for just this project on the watershed. So, you know, you guys need to think about what is best for you to do in your watershed and which type of analysis you want done, and either one can be done using the calculator. So, and also, if you guys feel that this is like an added benefit, just a % difference, let me know and I'll add it in. So that is how you could analyze that project, and then I'm going to do one more just to kind of drive it home and show a variety. Okay. So the final project that I'm going to show you is a residential landscape retrofit program. Retrofit of landscape devices, the target audience is a residential audience, and it's the top 10% water users. So the people who are really using a ton of water, if you can get them to, you know, change their landscape, do some xeriscaping, some of them it might cut their water by 50%, but it's just the 10% top water uses that are being targeted. And the targets are going to be through smart controls and high efficiency sprinklers. So this, oh, I didn't show you guys on that last one how you can evaluate if it reaches a larger audience, but I will on this one. So the population data is specific to the county of San Bernardino, so we're going through for a pretty big population, and then I have some water supply portfolio data and also some per capita water use data for them. So I'm going to enter that into the calculator and show you how that works. So you go to your population data, and you know this will be empty. It's just that we've been using it. So, wow, 1,645,000. So like I keep reminding you, this is the only data actually required to do the analysis. But we do have some additional site-specific data, so I'm going to go ahead and enter that as well. So population data has been entered, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the per capita water use, which okay, so that is the population, or the per capita water use data that I have. I don't have any projected future per capita water use data, so tool goes ahead and uses the last entered data, which is 203. And, just a reminder, if no per capita water use data was used, the 209 Southern California average would go to your water supply portfolio, and like 35% groundwater. So these guys are actually pretty true to Southern California defaults as far as closer than a lot of other areas are. Okay, so you can see that this gives us our no action scenario, which I'm going to go ahead and then to go in and change to see what the effect is for the greenhouse gas emissions, if it's what they expect, it will reduce per capita water use by 10% across the board. Even though it's just targeting the 10% water users, they're such a large percentage of the users that it does it by 10% across the board. So what you do is you come down here to per capita water use and you say it's a 10% reduction. And then that's perpetuated throughout, and you are coming out over here, 10% reduction. And you can go to your results tab and make it an action scenario and export results. And then you can go to your scenario comparison tool, go to the comparison tab, hit compare, and you see, well, that really didn't make that much difference. Something's wrong. Well, then maybe let's say it's going to reach a much larger audience, right? So let's go to our water use per capita. And it's 281, 231, 231, and 203, and then a 10% reduction. So, hold on. Hold on. Okay. Okay. Sorry, you guys. It's I have a little malfunction happening. Let me just fix it very quickly. So you go to your results tab. Go our scenario manager, and you probably want to open a fresh one just because you've been screwing with all of the scenarios that you really don't want to look at. So and open a new scenario manager, and then you can export your action scenario. Export your no action scenario. And then compare the two of those. Go to your comparison tab and hitting compare. And you'll see, okay, well, there is a difference. But what if we were able to get this suggested water savings out to a larger audience. You know, what could you possibly do with that? So then you can go to your greenhouse gas emissions calculator and go to population. And you can leave everything the same and just say, okay, what if we were able to get this out to twice as many people, or let's say 1 million people instead of the 1. That takes us, right? So say you got it out to half your watershed instead of just the specified area. Populations, like so, and and action scenario. Go to your per capita water use and reduce that by 10%. That can be your action scenario. It shows you how much more of an effect of greenhouse gas emissions reduction it will have. So, you know, we were almost half of what we were over here on the y-axis before, where now we're having a much larger impact as a whole. Even though the percentage is the same, the total greenhouse gas emissions impact is greater. So you see exactly what the difference is going to be in your per capita greenhouse gas emissions compared to if you reach a smaller audience. So the tool can be used in a variety of ways, of if you can reach more people, or if you can have a larger reduction. Also, you can say, well, we estimate that this program is going to have an effect of, like for the previous one, we said 7,240 acre-feet per year. Well, what if you don't meet your goal? And what if you only meet half of that? Then what's the effect of the greenhouse gas emissions, or effect on the greenhouse gas emissions? And so you can use this calculator to analyze a lot of different aspects of how that project might meet its goals, might not meet its goals, and what the effects are. And you can even put it in a range, say, well, if we were actually able to get this out to 700,000 people, this would be the greenhouse gas emission reduction. If we got it out to 2 million people, this is the greenhouse gas emission reduction. So it just shows, well, you know, how much PR and money are you willing to put into it, because it'll show the effects. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is, we're wrapping up here. I'm just going to quickly go over a few things. So the next steps for this project, right now, my group, in conjunction with our economics group here at the Technical Services Center of Reclamation, are applying for a grant from our Research and Development Office to continue this tool forward and create a cost-benefit analysis. So within a year, we're hoping that not only will you be able to say, this is my greenhouse gas emission baseline, these are the scenarios, these are the projects, analyze all of those things in the calculator, but also it'll show you what your cost savings from reduced energy use is going to be. Also, if they're utilized in this tool. So you can actually see, okay, what's my cost benefit from energy savings? What's my cost benefit from carbon savings? What is my carbon baseline? What are different scenarios that can help me reach my goals? So there's a variety of ways you can use this, and it's going to continue to evolve. OWW's website updated with the most to update the user's manual, and if anybody has questions when you're using it, please email me at kblickenstaff@us.gov, right on the screen there. I also want to, I know Caitlin's on the line from San Bernardino Valley, and I just wanted to say she is the very first user of the calculator, because it's not even officially posted on the website. She got a copy of it from Jeff Beeler, and she went ahead and analyzed her sub-area of the watershed, and with no help from me, went in and figured it out on her own. So I just wanted to say great job, Caitlin. And I saw your results. Jeff emailed them to me, and it looks like you used it effectively, and hopefully it wasn't too rough. So nice job.
Thank you.
And I think it's up for questions at this point. Unless, Jack, do you have anything that you want to clarify or put in?
meeting, just my phone number for anybody that locally wants, or you have your contact information up there as well, but my number again is 951-695-5310. Thank you, and thank you for the presentation.
Absolutely. It's a little bit of a challenge to come up with questions since you guys haven't used it yet, but like Jack said, it will be on SAPA's website within 2 weeks, and you'll have them eventually.
Kristine, this is Mark Norton. Just a question. In your various runs of this model using various projects, have you seen any general correlations between percentage reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, perhaps tied to per capita use? For instance, if one parameter is reduced because of conservation, have you generally seen the same percentage reduction of greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, I did a sensitivity analysis with this tool to determine how to get you the largest bang for your buck. So is it more important that I adjust my water supply portfolio, or is it more important that I reduce my water treatment? You know, various things that you can do. And hands down, per capita water use reduction is the first and foremost way you should reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, because you get your biggest bang for your buck. So not only are you conserving energy, you're conserving water, and it's just the cheapest, easiest, well, relatively easiest way to reduce your energy use and your greenhouse gas emissions, and in turn your water use. So those are all good things, and that's the number one thing that really shines bright when you're using this, is just conservation really, really matters.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. And, you know, the other thing I didn't show you guys, because it's kind of a lot of information, unless you've worked with the tool, you might not care yet, but at some point you're going to care. So these blue tabs over here, this detailed site-specific data. What you can do here is your imported water from the State Water Project, and you can do monthly data in this column from 1990 all the way down to present. Or if you don't have monthly data, you can do annual data. Just make sure don't do both, because the monthly obviously sums to annual if you don't use annual. So go ahead and use annual if you want, but using this site-specific data is going to greatly increase the accuracy of your results, and you can go through and do it for the Colorado River water data, your treatment data. And so for like your treatment data, you need to put in not only your flow data here per plant, but also your energy used per plant. And you can put it in monthly or annual, and it sums it all together and gives you a water intensity. So this will show you what your water intensities are for that specific energy use. Or excuse me, I said water intensities. I meant energy intensities. And the same thing for groundwater. So you put in each of your pumps that you're analyzing, the flow data for those pumps. Then you put in the energy data for those pumps. And that's how you get really, really detailed site-specific results, is you go through and you put in that monthly data or annual data. And then that way, the only data that you're relying on when you fill out all of these tabs is the energy intensity. And the energy intensities, you know, there's high, medium, and low values, and you can select which one you want to use. But they're pretty good for averages of Southern California. Like I said, they're specific to Southern California, and it's a good estimate. But if you have that very, very detailed site-specific data, go ahead and use it, but it becomes a much larger project to put that in. And when you are personally working with the tool and you come here and you don't like what the default data says and you go, wow, I don't like that, I have here where I got it from in these yellow boxes, so that you can say, okay, well, I guess that does make sense and I accept it. Or you can say, no way, I don't like that source. I'm going to put in my own data. And if you don't like that default, change it. Put in your own default, you know, that you calculate or that you found somewhere else. And make this your own tool that you can use to your greatest advantage for your area. And not everybody's going to have the same interests and dues as they go through it. But, you know, continue to use this. And as time moves forward, you know, I'll extend these out as eGrid publishes them, and so it'll continue to be up to date. And if you use it in 6 months, make sure you go to SAPA's website and download the newest version, because it's likely to have changed. I have to tell you guys now. Questions?
This is Caitlin. I have one question.
Yeah, Caitlin, go ahead.
What is your definition of self-supplied water?
That is such a good question. So self-supplied water comes into play in two different aspects. If you have a reservoir in your watershed and it's not imported water, and you're using that water, that is self-supplied water. So the energy intensity to treat that water is obviously accounted for, but you don't have to, water doesn't have to travel over large elevations and over large distances. So the only energy required for that water is treatment and then distribution. So that is accounted for in self-supplied water, but importing the water, pumping the water from the ground, not included. If you had a project where you were reusing water, so you came out of your treatment plant and you were going to then inject it into recharge wells and recharge the groundwater, that would actually reduce your imported water and increase your groundwater. But if you were going to take water reuse and then take it straight back into the potable water treatment plant and then redistribute it, then that would increase your self-supplied water, not your groundwater. Does that answer your question a little bit, Caitlin?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I know. That I should probably add that definition. I should probably put a definitions page so it's a little bit more clear. Thank you for that. Anyone else? We're almost out of time. Okay. I'm going to, as you guys are signing off, I'm going to leave my contact info up, and please feel free to use it for anything, even if it's just small. You can, like Jack said, you can also call him. The guys at SAPA are a great resource. They've heard me present this 500,000 times, so they probably know a lot, and you can feel free to ask them. But I think everyone's available to help if anybody needs it. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Kristine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kristine?
Hello?
Kristine?
Yes.
This is Wayne Worthington. I'm up here with the California High-Speed Rail Authority.